how to render an exterior wall, which is an outside wall, or another word for it is an external wall. So how to render the wall right here is the money shot, or should I say the money coat. This is what we plasters get paid for. This is the finish right here. I'm going to show you how I achieve this finish step by step. Now, plastering might look easy, but plastering and rendering is very hard physically, and it's also hard to learn. So respect us pure plasters, as we do work very hard to get such a great finish that hopefully should outlive us. Trust me, plasters were hurt in the making of this video. Every good wall you see, a plaster was probably hurt doing it, whether it be his back, his arms, his head, his eyes, his feet, his hands, you name it. Us plasters, we have probably heard it. On this one, I'll show you how to render a wall, like the one behind me, and get a nice smooth finish on it. Again, this is a finished job of its own. You could leave it like that there, pretty waterproof as is, or you could paint it. This particular job will be getting done with acrylic render. And again, so like I said, it is a finished job on its own, but can have all the extras adds on if you want to paint acrylic. But this video is going to be mostly about how we get to this stage. So just before we got to this point, needed to remove all this old loose post plaster, all sorts of coats of it. Then we needed to scud the walls for a great bond and key for the next coat. That was the scratch coat, and all those videos are previous to this video, and I will have them in the description if you need to check them out first. Let's break this down into 4 stages: mixing and prep and coating, getting it straight, and finally finishing up and cleaning. So stage 1 will be the mixing stage and the preparation stage. So usually my top coat's 4:1. I do put a little bit of plasticizer in and a little bit of waterproofer also. And you could use, the drill or mix it by hand, or use a cement mixer or a big large cement mixer, just depending on the job you're doing. But again, quantities I'd usually do 4:1 on my top coat, and while I'm mixing, I would wet down the walls, scrape the walls, have all my tools and my boards and my buckets all clean and ready to go. So now everything's prepped and wet down, ready to go. Again, controlling your suction is quite a key thing, whether you're working over a red brick that's very high suction, or a block that's really old and high suction, or something that's low suction. You're going to want to, depending on how much you want to wet the wall, how much you want to hydrate it. If you overhydrate something, it's going to be also very hard to finish, especially along the bottom foot up. It's going to be very wet down there. So yeah, you're going to have to sort of want to control what you're doing, and try and figure out, is it high or low suction. And you can do that by just using a wee trowel full before you even wet the wall and seeing how quickly it dries, and that will give you an idea of how fast you need to move and how wet you might want to get the wall in the first place. So back to the actual coating, and the whole idea of coating, guys, is getting it on the wall so that you can then straighten it. And in my opinion, the neater you put it on, the easier it is straightened. That goes for every coat previous. That's your scud coat, that's your beads and your scratch coat. Everything on as neat as possible will make the next stage that much easier. I'm always preaching it, and I practice what I preach. So very awkward here. Still trying to be as neat as possible. These pipes will be boxed in, so there won't be a big issue come the actual finish of the job, but still needs plastered underneath just to keep sure everything's sealed. But yeah, depending on what hand you are, really, for me, depends where you want to start, left or right. The the main thing to me is that you're neat and tidy and you're pressing the stuff on so it's well into the keys of your sketch coat, and that, to me, that's the most main thing, and you're not dropping too much stuff because you had to mix it in the first place, so you don't want to be giving yourself extra work, and basically get everything all laid on neat as possible, ready for the next stage. Before we get to the next stage though, I do want to say, don't get too caught up on, it's a big wall and get all flustered and wasting energy on it. Do what I'm doing, stay organised, plan your wall, stay left to right, take sections at a time. Again guys, rendering big walls, sometimes you're better not looking at it as a whole and just concentrating on areas, sort of bays in your mind, splitting things up so it doesn't get overwhelming. Where if you look at the whole job, it might get a bit more overwhelming, trying to concentrate on everything at once, other than taking it wall by wall, section by section, area by area. Now we'll have everything coated. It's time to straighten it up. I do have other videos on the same subject here. As you can see, I'm using the refina serrated feather edge here, and all that smooth area was slack. You can see how I'm actually cutting it off there so that I know that it's all straight, left to right. Again, any smooth areas for this would be areas you need to apply more plaster. They're hollows. Also, you need to look across your straight edge at times to make sure that you have no big bumps and you're just riding over the top of the big bumps if there's any dry spots. And and checking it left to right and up and down is pretty valuable, guys. The beauty about this one is the beads, that I can pull up off the beads, and that kind of kills it up and down as well for that section. Again, don't get too overwhelmed on it. Straighten the areas that we're on first, or the areas that are drying first. If something's drying first, you might want to use a different straight edge, and you can close it in, and what that'll do is it'll give you a bit more time to rub it up as it locks some moisture in, where I'm leaving it all open here, and that'll give me less time because the air's getting in through it. It's the air's getting in round the render, and it's going to dry that bit quicker. But I'm sort of on top of it here, so I'm not going to panic, and I'm going to, like I say, head it both directions there, guys. Again, if you want to dab out the wall and work off them, the only thing is, on an outside wall it's going to look quite messy, whereas if you just straighten it off your beads and stuff and straighten off the screeds that you're putting in place yourself, then it should rub very well and you shouldn't have any issues. Again, just like all the previous stages, the straighter you leave this, the easier it will be to actually float up and finish. The straight edge use isn't as important as the man behind it. Realistically, you can use a piece of timber as long as it's straight, or timber frame, or anything. Doesn't have to even be metal. It can be timber as long as it's straight, guys. Stage 4, which will be rubbing up the wall, actually finishing it. Again, if you're really good on the float, you don't have to sponge the wall, but the sponge does leave that little bit nicer of a finish. You can actually see a sponge laying there as if it was placed there for advertisement purposes. For I think that's a refina cut sponge. They do wash that bit easier, but it wasn't. It was just left there as a trip hazard. So yeah, back to the float, guys. A well broken in float will help absolutely leaps and bounds, but if you are watching this, most likely you're a wee bit more new to the trade. You might not have a well broken in float, but if you're lucky enough to borrow one or buy one, or you can rub the edges a wee bit with sandpaper gently just to help curve them down a wee bit so they're just not as sharp. But that being said, the more you use it, the better it becomes. A bit like the more we plaster, the better it will become. So back to it. The whole idea here is that we're rubbing it we're actually starting to smooth in the surface. And what the float does, it sort of compacts the surface. It'll give it that wee bit of solid strength on the surface. And what we also do is we fill in any little holes that have happened from the straightening or the coating process. And what that'll do is give you a nice uniform look. Again, this stage is very much with timing and how well you've controlled your suction and what you've added in your mix. As too much plasticizer and you're going to struggle rubbing, too little plasticizer and you're going to struggle rubbing it up too. Again, too much plasticizer are also going to weaken your sand and cement, so there is a balance. In my opinion, it's almost a wee bit science. I know people say plastering is not rocket science, but I have yet to see a rocket scientist plastering a wall. But back to it, guys. So we're filling in all the holes here and we're polishing off the surface, making it nice and smooth. And like I said, you could stop here, but if you want to go that little step further, when you have it all rubbed in and you're happy there's no holes, no lines, no rub marks, and it's starting to look really good, then you could just polish it up with a sponge. I'll show that very shortly. I just want to get to the fact of with rubbing as well, with sand and cement, that if you rub too late you can leave burn marks, and if you use water to bring them back you also stain the sand and cement, so bear that in mind. This job in particular, that wouldn't matter at all, because there's going to be acrylic going over this, so there's going to be a coat of primer and then acrylic. Again, I might upload that if any of you are interested. Let me know in the comments and I'll put that on the priority list. But the way I sponge is I would usually rub a section and then maybe sponge that area and then rub another section and sponge that area. Again, the sponges used, sponge floats, I tend to find are very good for if you're rubbing, if you missed a couple of wee bits. The sponge floats do help. They can help rub it in a wee bit. The likes of reveals, they're very nice on reveals, especially heads. If you're afraid to actually rub your head because it's a bit heavy, it's a bit wet still, the sponge float sometimes is a better alternative. As long as it's all laid on nice and neat and tidy and straight, then you'll have no issue with that. But yeah, so once you have it all rubbed up with your float, it's time to give it a polish with the sponge float or just a car sponge. We're really on the home straight now, guys, and this is the sponge float up close in action. Sort of what I was saying there, sometimes you get the odd pip, and I do find the sponge floats actually take care of them quite well. As you notice there was a couple of wee tiny holes and they soon disappeared. Last but not least is the good old car sponge. Also leaves a very nice finish. That being said, some sponge floats you can get finer sponges for them. I do have them as well, and sometimes they're a wee bit easier just to hold and maneuver on the wall. Just depends what you're used to and what finish you're really after. Don't think I've missed anything out, but if I have, I'll use plastering warriors. Can let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this, why not keep watching more?